Quería ver un vídeo, ahora que estamos. Tenía ganas de ver con vosotros un vídeo. ¿Conocéis un canal de YouTube que se llama Marbler? Este canal, yo diría que es el mejor canal de Overwatch del mundo. Y no estoy de coña, gente. Hace vídeos con bugs o interacciones muy curiosas que hay dentro del juego y te hace unos vídeos súper bien editados explicándote cosas, como cosas muy raras, ¿no? A nivel de código. Aquí había uno, por ejemplo. ¿Dónde está? En los últimos, los nuevos. Hace vídeo cada mucho tiempo, ¿vale? Hace 3 meses. Este no lo he visto. Este dice, los puntos de spawn no son iguales. Vamos a verlo. Vamos a verlo. Le voy a poner subtítulos. ¿Puedo poner subtítulos en español? Subtítulos en albanés, no. Traducir automáticamente al español. Ese tío hace los vídeos increíbles, ¿eh? Vamos a verlo.
Not many people know this, but outside of making videos about the most useless Overwatch information you could possibly imagine, I do a little bit of game development. Specifically, I work on a marble game called Marble It Up Ultra.
Anda, mira.
I know. There are a lot of interesting things
Él hace videojuegos.
like level building, physics programming, and UI design. But it was the spawning system for the multiplayer side of the game that made me wonder, how does Overwatch decide where to spawn you? It sounds like a dumb question since you just spawn in the spawn room. But I wanted to know exactly where you spawn. In a game like Counter-Strike, understanding this kind of spawn variance is pretty important. Your spawn location on any
en Counter-Strike, por ejemplo, donde spawnes es muy importante. Porque llegas antes que tu enemigo. Mira qué bien editado está, tío.
Is it a good thing for the game? And whether or not it can be improved in the future. Yet in Overwatch, it seems as though nobody cares about this aspect of the game.
A nadie le importa dónde spawneas, es verdad.
In a hero shooter, where ult economy and cooldown management generally matter more than the precise positioning and lineups of a tactical shooter. Or it could be that anyone who does care quickly gives up since there's little to no information on how spawn points actually work. So let's change that. What is a spawn point?
Mira, ¿qué es un spawn point?
Here's one. You can't see it because
no puedes verlo porque es invisible. Lo va a poner ahí con el editor este.
A little pointy stick indicating your facing direction when spawning here, a color to display which team this spawn belongs to, and an ID number corresponding to the spawn point's
es que lo hace muy bien, tío. Es que lo hace muy bien.
The spawn point layout looks like this. 6 spawn points packed closely together, sometimes in a line, sometimes in a rectangle, sometimes in whatever this is. There are 6 spawn points because
¿Por qué son tan raros los spawns?
Which provided enough spawn points for each player to have their own spawn point. The main game types in Overwatch 2 are 5v5, leaving one spawn point empty when everyone spawns in.
Anda.
So the question is, what determines which spawn point is left out? How are spawn points
¿Qué determina qué punto de spawn se deja?
For a few hours. Trust me, it was the only way to find a pattern. So, are spawn locations determined by role?
No, no es por rol.
Players are spawned alphabetically by hero name.
No, tampoco.
Or are they spawned alphabetically by their username?
Tampoco.
Perhaps it's done in the order of their slot ID? No, of course not. It's completely random. Which was evident after about 5 minutes, but I kept spawning bots because it was fun. Actually, there is one stipulation. When a player spawns, their spawn point becomes claimed for 3 seconds. During this time, it is ineligible to be used by another respawning player.
Hostia. Durante 3 segundos no te puedes spawnear al mismo... en el mismo sitio. Pero si te quedas más de 3 segundos, pueden respawnearte allí dentro. Eso es.
And if every spawn point is claimed at the same time, the spawn with the lowest cooldown becomes eligible as a failsafe. So if the game ever becomes 7v7,
si alguna vez el juego se vuelve 7 contra 7,
even though there are only 6 spawn points. While some maps have spawn point layouts that mitigate this randomness very well, there are other maps where some spawn points are irrefutably better than others.
Esto es interesante. Dependiendo de la posición del spawn, estás más favorecido a llegar al punto que depende de la otra, ¿no? Y no es tontería, ¿eh? Claro, pues puedes recibir una ventaja. Estamos hablando de cuando respawneas después de morirte, ¿vale? Tío, qué buenos vídeos hace esta persona, tío. ¿En tiempo? ¿En tiempo cuánto es? La bola va más rápido, el Soldier corre más rápido. ¡Que Tracer y Genji va más rápido! Chicos, llevo 6 años, 8 años jugando Overwatch y no sabía eso. No sabía que Tracer y Genji caminan más rápido. Me rayo. Me rayo. Me rayo. O sea, pensaba que era una velocidad insignificante, pero es bastante más, ¿eh? Mira, determina, depende de dónde aparezcas, determina 0,32 segundos. Parece una tontería, pero es medio segundo. Ahí está. En ruta son 0,45 más, ¿eh?
Think about a time you hauled it from the spawn room to the payload just in time to trigger overtime. Or the opposite, where you just barely miss it despite taking the racing line. Had you been randomly assigned to a different spawn point, these incidents could have ended differently.
Exacto. Dependiendo de dónde spawnees, puedes llegar o no a overtime.
Unlikely of occurrences happen more than once on this channel. It's like the infinite monkey theorem, but with Overwatch players. But I don't believe this is common enough to warrant an immediate redesign of spawn rooms, because while these spawn point layouts are suboptimal when considering pathing toward the main exit, a more fair layout would cause even greater disparities for the side exits.
Claro.
The game's been out for over 7 years, and nobody cared about this until now, which is a success in my book.
A nadie le importa. Nunca nadie se ha preocupado por esto de los spawns. Nunca.
And originally the video was going to end here, but this is only half the story, because so far we've only examined the differences in spawn points within the same spawn room. What about the differences between each team's spawn room?
¡Hostia!
For asymmetrical maps, the pathing between
Sí,
each
hombre.
team's spawn and the objective is so inherently different due to level geometry that directly comparing spawn points isn't very interesting. Symmetrical maps are where the differences between each team's spawn points would be significant, since both teams
Puede
do
haber
take the same
en un
path
mapa
to the
simétrico alguien que tenga mejor
but
spawn que
why would
otro.
there be differences? These maps are mirrored, so shouldn't the spawn points be the same on both sides?
Pues no.
Well, yes. Sometimes. Take Busan Downtown, for example. Team 1's spawn room is a PC bank, while Team 2's spawn room is a karaoke club. These spawn rooms have physically different layouts, so spawn placement can't be identical.
Son diferentes, está claro.
This is once again a less than ideal method of measuring, since drawing a straight line between the spawn room and the objective subverts the actual pathing required to reach it, and because the objective's origin point is sometimes off-center with the map, but this provides us with a very quick and consistent test to find any possible imbalance. The distance each team needs to cover to reach the point is impressively equal. Team 1 spawns on average 94.6 meters from the
menos 0,05 segundos.
so slightly further at
Chicos,
94.85 meters.
no puede ser un eSport.
These are close enough to where I wouldn't say one team
No
has
puede
a
ser un
serious
eSport.
advantage over the other. On New Queen Street, Team 1 spawns in a curling club, while Team 2 spawns in a subway station. Once again, each
Aquí
team
también.
spawns are roughly equidistant from the pushbot, with no crazy imbalance. So far, this bodes well. Most other symmetrical maps use the same level geometry in each team's spawn, like these airships used in control maps. Since these maps are perfectly mirrored, there are no differences between— oh wait, they're different. This was one of the more surprising finds during
Anda.
this video, since I previously
What the
assumed
fuck?
that spawn
¿Aquí son
points were grouped
diferentes?
with the airship prefab,
¿Por qué?
and thus identical across each airship. But this isn't the case because airships are not actually mirrored across each side. Each
Tío, estos
airship
vídeos
has the
están
same
demasiado bien hechos,
orientation in the map and flips which side of the model has its doors open depending on which side it's on. So the door behind Team 1's spawn points becomes the exit door for Team 2 and vice versa. Spawn points were then,
vale.
presumably, hand-placed for each airship instance, giving each one a slightly different layout from one another, except for the new map, Samoa, which has a completely unique spawn layout. These inconsistencies are harmless on their own, but the spawn point layouts are different between both teams on the same map as well. The level editor for Overwatch has a mirror tool that's used extensively in symmetrical
Anda, mira,
maps,
tiene
so
una
I'm
herramienta de
certain-
mirror que simplemente te hace un duplicado del mapa. Qué curioso, no sabía que teníamos esas herramientas en Overwatch.
why mirrored
O sea,
maps
en los
spawn
devs,
points.
vaya.
Regardless, I went and checked every map to find unbalanced
Sí,
spawn
hombre.
points. Here
Oye, pero este tío está loco. Ha chequeado todos los mapas para ver la distancia desde el spawn hasta el punto.
Lijiang Tower Control Center favors Team
Este
1
tío
by
está loco.
1.03 meters, or 0.19 seconds. And now behold Coliseum, which favors Team 2 by a whopping 2.31 meters. This is because Team 2's spawn points are placed further up the spawn room than Team 1's spawn points. And you thought the
Hostia.
glass was this map's biggest problem. This is probably the most egregious mistake out of all the maps, since this isn't just the
Los
average
puntos de spawn
position
están diferentes en el mapa de Coloseo y por lo tanto
rather
tardas más en
every
llegar
single
desde un
spawn
lado.
point being better than the other teams. No matter how you slice
En
it,
Coliseo es
players on
en donde
Team
más
2
pasa.
just spawn further
Hay un lado
ahead
que
than Team
spawneas
1,
mejor.
allowing for slightly faster re-engagements every fight. I'm really curious to see what the win rate statistics look like for these maps. You would expect symmetrical maps to be as close to perfectly balanced as possible, but it would be interesting to see if these spawn advantages
Dice que
correlate to a
sería
slightly
bueno
higher
ver
win
en
rate
qué
for one
lado
team.
¿En qué lado se beneficia más a nivel de porcentajes? 100 con 0,3, clavado. Clavado también. Verás el último. Ah. Dios. Casi un segundo más. ¿Qué coño?
Okay, so Team 1 has 12 spawn points. The 6 spawn points in the back mirror Team 2's spawn points, but then there are 6 more placed further ahead.
Porque hay 6 spawns más en el otro lado. Es muy raro esto, O sea, un segundo más de spawn. Cuidado, en un lado que de otro. Esto es muy loco,
The only reason I don't consider this to be worse than Coliseum is that there's at least a chance that both teams will spawn fairly, such as this match where nobody spawned in the front row a single time.
Claro, estos, por ejemplo, en este caso, estarían igualados al otro. Pero claro, hay algunos que salen beneficiados. Estos son casi un segundo, de distancia. ¡Qué fuerte!
Since this map has a strange number of spawn points, I went back and double-checked the number of spawn points in each map, just in case. The majority of spawn rooms in Overwatch have 6 spawn points, and the spawn rooms on Circuit Royal are no exception. Except for this one, which only has 5.
What?
Blizzard World has 5 spawn points in the attacker spawn. Just kidding, there's actually 6. What a silly little guy.
¿Por qué está ahí?
Midtown has the most missing spawns of any map, with its grand total of 4 spawn points in the first attacker spawn. The only thing I'd consider to be a real problem are the unmirrored spawn points on mirrored maps.
Claro.
Admittedly, some of these imbalances are pretty minor and probably don't influence the outcome of
Estas pequeñas no influyen, pero el de Antártica es muy heavy, tío. El de Antártica es muy heavy. Y Coliseo también. Que es casi un segundo. What? ¿Ha hecho un workshop? Para verlos. No puede ser. Este tío está loco. Este tío está loco. ¿Por qué quiere mirar un mapa de deathmatch? Se puso lentes encima de lentes.
The spawn points. On the surface, everything looks fine. There are 12 spawn points. None of the spawn points are actually aligned with the grid texture, as each one has a seemingly random offset. In fact, their heights are inconsistent as well. Spawn points 3, 4, 6, and 12 are 8 centimeters above the ground.
Tío, qué locura.
What's going on with the numbering? Spawn points 1, 2, and 3 are in order, but then it gets all crazy.
Los 1, 2 y 3 están perfectos y se vuelven locos después. Oye, ¿pero este tío tiene una carrera en Overwatch o qué? ¿Pero qué está descubriendo? Chicos, va a demostrar que la Tierra es plana. Claro, claro. Esto es alguien que tiene una super fijación en algo, le da mucha rabia y quiere descubrir el porqué.
Most of the spawn points aren't pointing to the center of the map, so every time you spawn, you're facing somewhere to the left or right of the origin. Well, with the exception of spawn point 3, which does face the exact center of the map.
El 3 sí que mira Absolute King.
Then why don't 4, 6, and 12 also face the center point the way 3 does? Well, if you look closely, the average spawn position is really at negative 0.05, 0.07, 0.07, which means the spawn points
no coincide con el centro, no coincide con el centro.
Really rotated around this random arbitrary point, and it's really bothering me. Please fix it.
Oye, este tío es un crack. Este tío es un maldito crack. Chicos, tenéis su canal, ¿vale? O sea, este canal es increíble. Miradlo, Marvel. Suscribíos. No estoy suscrito porque estoy en la cuenta de Toniki Marvel Rivals. Pero estoy suscrito a este canal, sube vídeos cada muchísimo tiempo, pero cuando sube un vídeo es increíble. Tiene muchos que son muy curiosos y que de verdad que este es el científico de Overwatch, tío. Este tío es el científico de Overwatch. Es increíble, es increíble. A mí me parece el mejor canal de Overwatch que existe, a nivel de técnico. Y la edición del vídeo es impresionante.